Hello, I'm Sarah Moore, a monitoring consultant with the Infant and Toddler Connection of Virginia. Welcome to this recorded presentation on Part C contact notes, documentation that reflects your visit. We will cover documentation requirements and documentation quality as part of this series. Part 1 of the series includes the introduction and content requirements for Part C contact notes. Let's start with the big picture in EI documentation. The big picture encompasses 3 objectives. 1, documentation should consider the whole child and his or her family and reflect early intervention's mission to empower families and caregivers. 2, documentation should reflect communication between IFSP team members using family-friendly language. 3, documentation should detail a child's unique life experiences, including progress and challenges during their time receiving early intervention. Each contact note or documentation entry in a child's record is part of a bigger picture of the early intervention services the child and family are receiving. One contact note builds upon another to make the big picture complete. In addition to these 3 objectives, documentation should relate to the Office of Special Education Program's 3 child outcomes: developing positive social-emotional relationships, acquiring and using new knowledge and skills, taking appropriate actions to get needs met. Documentation should support individual child outcome ratings and meet the Part C documentation requirements. So what makes the big picture? Contact notes and early intervention documentation need to reflect child and family strengths and child and family challenges using unbiased, non-judgmental, and respectful language. When documentation is honest, balanced, and meaningful, families can identify outcomes, services can be provided, progress can be measured, and next steps can be determined. IFSP teams collaborate with one another, and these teams include parents, caregivers, pediatricians, and daycare providers. Your documentation needs to reflect collaboration. When you talk with another professional involved in the care of a child you serve, that information should be included in the child's record. Documentation of communications across child team members helps keep all team members informed and everyone is updated. Ongoing assessment captures the child's functioning in all areas of development with regard to the 3 outcome areas. Ongoing assessment information gives a clear picture of a child's interests, family's concerns and priorities, as well as skills and challenges. Ongoing assessment lets the person reading documentation know the child's current abilities and what the next steps are to further their development within the family's daily activities and routines. So let's begin our focus on early intervention documentation by talking about contact notes. The question we want to ask is, what picture does your contact note paint? Our goal is documentation that reflects your visit. The reader can picture what happened. So what are the key pieces that must be included in a contact note? Let's start with the contact note checklist that can be found on page 11 in Chapter 9 of the Practice Manual. This lists all the required components. A copy of the contact note checklist is saved with this presentation. Also saved with this presentation are the 2 suggested progress note templates that include all required elements. These templates are not required, but use of these templates will ensure that all of the elements are included. All contact notes must include the child's first and last name, the type of service provided, the date the contact note was written, the length of the session, contact or activity in minutes, the date the service the date of the service or the contact, if it's different than the date of the note, and the location in which the service was provided. Location or setting can be listed with a separate prompt or included in the narrative. I've read several contact notes where I assumed the location was the child's home, but I really couldn't say for certain, as the happened in the note could have happened in a relative's home or in a neighbor's home. Never assume the reader will know the location. Be sure to state the location in each of your contact notes. Contact notes must also include the provider's signature with a minimum of the first initial and last name. Signatures can be handwritten or electronic. The provider's credentials and the date of the signature must also be documented. The date of the signature should always be the date your contact note was written. The contact note must also document who was present. Please list all participants in the session, including family members or neighbors who were visiting. And it's helpful to include a description, such as Mary, John's sister, or Ben, the child next door. If someone is in the home but does not participate in the session or observe, it is not necessary to include them. The narrative portion of our contact note is really what paints the picture of what occurred during the session. Many people hear the word narrative and become concerned that a lengthy dissertation is expected. The focus is not on the length of your narrative, but on the content. The narrative has several required key components. Narratives must include information from the family or caregiver regarding what has happened since the last session and progress on the joint plan that was developed at the previous session. Narratives must also provide details of how the provider supported the family or caregiver in a routine or activity, the strategies practiced, and the child's response. Your note should give specific examples of what the provider did, how the family or caregiver participated, and what the child did. The reader should be able to picture who did what for each person present during the visit. Contact notes provide the foundation for ongoing assessment. Skills observed or reported by the family or caregiver should be included in the narrative. These can be skills related to progress on IFSP outcomes and short-term goals and or new functional skills in any of the 3 global outcome areas. Documentation of functional skills in the 3 global outcome areas is not required for every note, but documentation should be included if new skills are observed or reported. The narrative should document your joint plan for implementation of strategies and supports between visits during the family or caregiver's daily routines and activities. I've reviewed contact notes that contain follow-up suggestions for the family that remind me of a homework assignment. Be sure your documentation of the joint plan reflects discussion with the family to identify what the family will do during specific daily activities and routines. The more tied in the joint plan is to the family's daily activities, the more likely the family will follow through. Finally, your contact note should document the plan for your next contact. This can be an agreed upon date or time, or an established time that you will contact the family to schedule the next contact. But someone should be able to look at your contact note and tell what will happen next, either a scheduled visit or a call to schedule the next visit. This concludes part 1 of the documentation presentation. To apply what we've learned about required content, review the contact note number 1 samples saved with this presentation. Add the notes to the contact note checklist. Ask yourself, what is missing? What else would you want to know? The next section of this series covers documenting ongoing assessment. Thank you for participating in part 1.